Whenever two people interact, there's always a chance of conflict. And it doesn't have to be fisticuffs. It can be just a simple difference of opinion. And this can grow and lead to various different level of anxiety and stress within people. Especially in a workplace, you might have people that don't want to engage in what might seem like conflict and therefore move to a different job. This is very expensive for employers. How do we resolve that? How do we develop a conflict IQ?
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to eSHAIR. Here we discuss and promote and share the benefits to all from living in an egalitarian society, including for men. Inaccurate propaganda leads some men to believe that they miss out with equality. The reality, suppressing women is detrimental to men. Creating a world where everyone can contribute equally makes everyone better off. And today it is my wonderful and great pleasure to welcome Yvette Durazo. Yvette was the youngest of 7 children, which instantly made her an expert negotiator and mediator. As a first-generation Hispanic university graduate and as a single mother attaining an advanced degree, Yvette knows what it's like to overcome challenges. She's an adjunct professor for the University of California, founder and principal consultant of Unitive Consulting, plus the author of Conflict Intelligent Quotient, Conflict IQ. The missing piece to turbocharge conscious leaders and organizations' emotional intelligence. Wow. Welcome, Yvette. Amazing.
Thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast. Much appreciated.
It's my pleasure. And as we were talking in the pre-show, I was very excited to have you on the show. Your book covers so much wonderful ground, and we'll get to that component of the book shortly. But before we do that, can we jump in? You might remember a car. It was a silver car that Doc Brown invented, and when you went 88 miles an hour, it went back in time. It's from the movie Back to the Future. Do you want to jump in that and let's hit 88 miles an hour, go back in time to where you encountered some key challenges that you had to overcome that led you to what you're doing now?
Well, I ever since I was born, pretty much, because imagine I was the youngest of 7, and basically my mom and dad were not expecting me because they were already pretty much almost in their 50s.
Yeah.
And my mom thought that she was in menopause, and then all of a sudden I showed up. So
Wow.
she was not expecting that. And then on top of that, I had siblings that were way older than me. And I always felt that when I showed up, the youngest of the 7 really felt the effects, because all of a sudden that child didn't get all the emotional attention.
Yeah.
And then I was born and I was getting all the attention, and my older brother was all over me because I was so little and cute and all of that. So everything started there. And at a very young age, for various circumstances, I had to leave home, and I became a mom at a very young age. I was, pretty much very young when, I was illegally young, and I had already my first child, and I had to learn how to maneuver and negotiate with the father of my son, at that time in order for him to allow me to go to school, because he was from Mexico. He was a Mexican, and in that culture, women stay home and take care of children. They don't go to school. So I had to learn how to negotiate and tell this person, you're going to look well in the eyes of my parents if you allow me to go to school, and I had to learn how to negotiate through that process. So I put myself in school. My son was 3 months old, and I never stopped until he was almost 8 years, and it took me a while because I had to finish up high school. By that time, I didn't know that I had dyslexia. As you can hear, I have an accent. I speak Spanish, and I was born in the United States, but nevertheless, living in the border town through Mexico, my first language was Spanish, and I struggled. And little did I know until I graduated from my bachelor's degree that I had dyslexia, right? And I struggled, and it took me several years, more than the usual, to get my bachelor's degree, but that didn't stop me, right? Years after, I decided to go and get a master's degree in negotiation, conflict resolution. Again, with that idea that somehow, as I was working after my bachelor's, I really didn't know how to negotiate in my career. I literally didn't know how to take advantage of the bachelor's degree, that back in that day, a bachelor's degree was a good degree. Now you have to have a master's and a PhD. and I just didn't know any better. I went off with a bachelor's degree, and I went off to work as a receptionist, because nobody taught me that if I would go to career centers in the school, I could have gone picked up by one of the companies, bigger companies, and they would have developed me. And I seen women my age that have, for example, worked for Pepsi Cola or for big, huge organizations, and they came from the same environment where I grew up, almost the same age, and all of a sudden they're VPs right now. They're, they have had an amazing career, but nobody taught me anything. And here I am, taking care of a child, dealing with the difficulty in my relationship with the dad of my child, and trying to figure out life. So I had a lot of struggle, as you can see. But I also had that, certainty about me that nothing will stop me, right? Obviously, as you can say, language wasn't, was in a way a barrier. It was difficult for me, even though that I was born in the United States. I always had Spanish as my first language, right? And when I went to work, I was struggling because my writing wasn't well, and I was doing administrative work with a bachelor's degree, and like I said, it took a while. Then eventually I became a single mom. By that time I already had 2 children, and I went to work for a huge university, and in there I also wasn't very much supported because I had an accent. I was Hispanic or Latina, and there was not a lot of mobility for Latinos there, but then I couldn't leave that job because that was a secure job with insurance, and I was a provider for the family, right? And but nevertheless, I continue my development, getting my master's degree. Simultaneously, I got a coaching credential that it was also very similar to a master's degree, a lot of work, and I was working full time. Waking up very early in the morning, sleeping 4 or 5 hours a day in order to make sure that I get the degree. And then, 12 years after I graduated from that master's degree, little by little, I have been developing my consulting business because I was fascinated with the field of work that I'm doing. I wanted to become a subject matter expert, and I did everything that I could to make that happen. Not only did I went to obtain a master's degree, but I put my hands in all of the books that you can think of, went and got not one, but several certifications as a mediator, Nonviolent communication, you already mentioned. Bill Eddy, he's in San Diego. I went to his trainings in high conflict personalities.
Yeah.
I put my hands in everything that I could have because I felt a big responsibility that if I was going to go out and work with organizations and professionals, that I wanted to make sure that I had all the tools available in order to help the organizations, right? And on top of that, not only did I wanted to become a subject matter expert on this, but I also went to my deals of bullying in the workplace, micromanagers, you name it, clicks. So I know firsthand how it feels to lose your health because of being in toxic environments.
Yeah.
So not only am I book smart and educational smart about the subject, but I also went through my own. And I think that makes me very effective consultant and coach. And when I'm training people, because I have gone through what people have gone through, right? I have gone through toxic environments and I know what it is. I always thought when I was going through those hardships that even though that I was doing a master's degree in that area, I still didn't know what bullying was. It took me time to figure it out that is what was happening in my environment. It was incredible. And I said, if that happened to me, it could happen to a lot of people, especially younger generations that go into the workplace. They have experienced microaggressions, putting people down and all of these bad things that bullies tend to do. I want to go out there and I want to educate people. I want to help organizations to make the best out of an environment where 80% of your waking hours, you're there, right? And you might think right now that people are not dealing with conflict in the workplace because they're working out of their computer. And what I have found is that in the contrary, because of the fact that we have gone through a lot of trauma with all the pandemic, because literally the narrative was changing at us constantly. That generates trauma on the brain. Then you have the social injustice movement. Then you have all the political turmoil. So with all of that, people are very sensitive. And it doesn't mean that because they're working out of the computer, their emotions of not wanting to work with that boss or that coworker or that manager that is not nice to them, it doesn't go away. They still have those visceral emotions and mental emotions when they have to be in meetings and things like that. And I'm telling you because in these past 4 years, I have seen a lot of that. So it doesn't stop there, right? So I jumped from my own struggles to what I'm doing here at my work that I do, my consulting work. So that is and if you want extra more, I can tell you that I also was dealing with severe health issues, autoimmune, and where sometimes it was very difficult to walk up the stairs. Severe anxiety. I still have anxiety. I manage it after so many years. I learned how to manage it, or I know techniques that will eventually help me to calm me down and get me better.
With the anxiety side of things. Most people, I think, experience that to some level. So,
of course, but I dealt with that. So I have gone through a lot of. Do you want more?
I love it. And this is what I find really amazing in your story and doing the research into your background and your book. And what I really want to understand is, because like you say, you've gone through this, you've had anxiety and severe anxiety, and you've overcome that. You had health issues. You've been in a bullying environment. You've experienced that. One thing you said here, which I wrote down, was you said nothing's going to stop me. What was it? What do you think gave you that drive to? Because some people would just go, give up, can't do it. But I know from, and I got this sense from reading about you and reading your book. But now talking with you, it seemed you have something inside you that says, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep pushing forward. What do you think that is? What do you think? Where do you think that came from?
Well, first of all, I think it comes from the passion of wanting to to make a difference in the world.
Ah,
Because if I go in, I noticed from the beginning that if I wanted to work with people, telling them that I was going to help them to resolve conflict inside the house,
yeah,
it wasn't making any impact, because
yeah,
people don't change until something hurts them a lot.
yeah,
You have to pay a lot of money for it, or you
yeah.
really inspire them and you give them a lot of knowledge, right? You have for situations in where people can change or want to transform. I noticed that if I were to go to an individual and say, you know, I can help you with the skill sets and you can be a better person, they would not be interested.
Yeah.
But if I go to organizations and I tell them, and I do the mathematical information that I do, and I said, look, you're losing money because your HR department, where you're sending people with conflict, when it gets to HR, what happens is that it is too late, and they literally have to go through a treadmill, right? Either policies and procedures, either you behave or we're going to fire you.
Yeah.
Most likely than not, people get fired, people get poached out of the company. When in reality, what people needed was the human side of how to deal with the conflict, being empowered of how to communicate better, being able to understand where the other person is coming from and why are they doing what they're doing, right? And have that level of understanding, and being able to perhaps help individuals become responsible for what they're doing inside the workplace, because it could be that two people are in conflict, but for one reason or another, they're just blaming each other and they don't take responsibility. So HR, I went and studied a whole certificate in HR because I really wanted to dig in and verify why HR would not do the mediation, conflict resolution, because first of all, they don't have time. You can have 1,000 employees for 2 HR people. They literally have to protect the organization, and whatever legal counsel tells them that they're going to do, they're just going to do. And they're not skilled very much on this. And I want to change that. I want to make sure that HR knows how to do mediation, conflict resolution. That's what I'm teaching at the university, the one you mentioned at UC Santa Cruz Extension. That's what I'm doing. It's one of the 3 universities where I teach. And I have that passion that I want to give an opportunity to organizations to create environments that are healthier for people to work with. And not only that, I saw firsthand with my father how he used to be a leader that people will follow and people will respect, and employees will be so loyal to him because he always treated them with respect. He always knew how to deal with difficult situations, and employees were so loyal that they will take care of the family business like if it was their own. So I saw that firsthand, and my father didn't have any higher education. He barely went to 2nd grade elementary school. And he was a self-made man. So with all that my knowledge that I have and all my experience, this is what I want to come and do and work with organizations, especially those organizations that, I don't know if you have ever heard about the what is it, B certifications, the certifications for organizations that are not necessarily just in for profit, but they also have a social justice component to it. So those are the organizations that I think that will be interested more in bringing somebody like me to come in and help them with their culture in order to be able to, navigate situations, difficult conversations, in order for it not to escalate to toxic environments, right? You also have other, I think that there's few certifications that good companies. I think it's another certification of companies that are the best companies to work for, right? And that's what my hope is, that with what I have, I can be of value to those organizations so that we can build better leaders that people love to follow, and not based on fear, but because they can lean into situations that are difficult, they know how to handle it. They know how to change the levels of consciousness in order to get through things. And those are the people that you would admire, right? And you would want to follow, right?
Do you think
because
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I think that the narrative of conflict in everywhere, it's very predominated in violence and in people being against each other. You know, you see reality shows, you turn out to TV and you see violence everywhere. And that is my passion, to change that, to empower people to know that they shouldn't be afraid of any conflict, that if they learn how to, self-regulate their emotions and understand that indeed nobody teaches us conflict resolution until either you go to a class. If you go all the way from elementary all the way to a PhD, nobody's teaching these skills. You learn them when you were little, and that's what you take on for all your life. That's why when situations happen in the workplace, the middle school child shows up, and that's the skills that you use in order to deal with conflict. And it's not the most appropriate way to deal with conflict, right?
Smacking the other person probably doesn't work the best. Do you think this desire, this passion, you say you had a passion to want to make the world make a difference in the world? Do you think that connected, because you mentioned about your dad as well, and the way you talked about your dad sounds like you look up to him very highly in his ability to, you said your father, he was a self-made man who he treated people with respect. And he was good at conflict resolution. Do you think that was a driver, an underlying driver of growing up and seeing your dad and the difference he made in people's lives to you wanting to sort of expand on that?
Yes, definitely. That created a huge impact. My playground as a child was his business. Wow. Ever since I was little, I was already dealing with the accountant, giving the invoices, giving the receipts, and that was my playground. And I was the one out of my brothers and sisters that was able to experience my father full blown, because I was always with him as much as I could, right? Obviously, I would have to go to school. And then my brothers were already old enough. They were on their own, not necessarily very close to the business, but I was there. And I was able to experience, many times that my father would help people that would not even pay him back. And I would ask my dad, why are you doing this? They haven't even paid you. And he would say, you know what? They need the money. They have family to take care of. They need the money. And it took me about 30 years to understand the level of joy that he would gain out of helping people without expecting anything in return. Which in society, you go and talk to anybody, everybody is expecting something from somebody. If they give you something, they're expecting something. So I think that because of his level of spirituality, being an orphan himself and being able to turn his life around to be a man of good. He was a great father, a man of how do you say it? A man of trust and authenticity. If somebody that came from that background can do what he did, and I was able to experience, even when my father passed away, years passed, I would talk to some of the employees that he had, they would literally cry because he was a man that really impacted people just because of the way his way of being. And that is what I'm teaching in this book, that conflict resolution is not necessarily just giving you a skill. I want to inspire you to become conflict intelligence, to become that leader that can deal with situations and will not shy away, right? Will not fear, will not be worried, but rather lean in and be able to work with the other human being in order to be able to understand. Obviously, that to become conflict intelligent, it does involve a lot of skill sets and awareness and behavioral modification. But at the same time, it's a meta skill. It's a lot of skills. You mentioned earlier today, you mentioned something that you wanted to learn how to listen more, especially when you're doing podcasts, right? So that is just one of the skills. But then how can you embed skills when people can utilize them in, how do you say, to manipulate people, right? How can you teach these individuals from within? First of all, create awareness as to how is it that they ever resolve conflict. Because usually by default, it's avoidance or being aggressive, right? And there's many other ways to deal with that. Then teaching them skill sets and then behavior modification so that it becomes natural in them. And so that it is like, okay, there's an issue, I'm in. Let me figure it out how to do this, right? Let's figure it out as a team. Instead of saying everybody else takes care of it, I'm not going to worry about it. No, it's somebody that has the ability to do that. So that is what the conflict intelligence is about.
I love that. And from that perspective as well, because as you were talking about, you know, today's environment, certainly with employees and the workplace and the demographics is a real big factor, which organizations, I don't think many have fully grasped what is happening and going to happen. Because when you had the baby boomers coming out and entering the workforce, there was an abundance of employees. So the employers really got to dictate, you know, this is how it's going to be. Suck it up or get lost. We'll find someone else because there's an abundance there. But now with the demographics shifting, probably not so much in your area in America and Mexico, because you have the demographics are very different there to the majority of the world. But the majority of the world, we've got a very large, because I think the demographics in the US are more of a column, and Mexico is still the other way, where there's a lot of young youth around, younger people in the workforce. But certainly the rest of the world, we're in an aging population where there isn't the employees available. So as an organization, if you want to obtain and keep employees, you've got to operate from how your father did. Because, I mean, when you look at some of the principles, and I can see from, well, I'm reading into it, talking to you, that those principles were there from your father, that was instilled in, and you've expanded on that and found all the research to support that. You're saying he did it intuitively, or he learnt it. From that side of things, if your father was a manager today, how loyal do you think his employees would be?
I think that, you know, I don't know if you heard that last recession, when they studied the organizations that came afloat. It was those organizations that took employees and sit with them and tried to figure it out, plan together. That created inclusiveness. That created like, you know what, I can reduce 10 hours out of my work days so that you don't fire this other person. That created inclusiveness, that created belonging. And guess what? Those companies did pretty well. Now we're hitting into this other strange recession that is happening, because I say it's strange because in some sectors of the work, things are doing well and others are not. You know, that is where the organization need to really put attention to in their human capital. One thing that you mentioned, that you said, you know, that in where you are, things are very different because people are aging. Right now in the United States, we have about 5 different generations working together. You know, the older people cannot retire because the inflation has been so high that cannot retire. So you have a lot of people with different needs, different beliefs. So that itself also creates a level of complexity and communications that will not go well. And yes, the United States is dealing with the situation that also people don't want to work. And it's not that they don't want to work, is that, you know, when individuals, human beings, are exposed to a life and threat, it's like, you know what, you can die tomorrow. You can get the pandemic, you know, you can get the virus and you can die. People had it so close to them that they realized that it was a false perception, the idea to go up the ladder in organizations. People started retrospecting and saying, you know what is best for me? You know, what is best for me? Do I really want to work in a higher corporate and be paying a whole bunch of money for this house and this car and everything? Or can I go and live in another place where it's nicer and it's less expensive and I can do work remotely? So we're dealing with that. And then on top of that, people would say, you know what? Anyways, I didn't like even to work with the people that I work with. I had a aggressive boss. I don't want to work with people that are constantly creating conflict, that are bullying me or doing microaggressions. I don't want that in my life. I have choice, and people somehow open up their eyes and saw that there's choices.
Yeah.
And that is what's transforming the human from within, right? And then it is difficult for companies to really bring these employees back, because now it's like, you know what? I don't want to work for you if you're not going to treat me well.
Yes.
I deserve to be treated well. I deserve an environment where I am joyful to go and work, because I spend 80% of my waking hours in that work.
Yeah.
The other 4 or 5 are with my family, and then the rest of it, I'm sleeping, right? So people has woken up with everything that has been happening, and I think that organizations now really are gonna have to become creative and find different ways of how to keep people. Research has shown that it takes about 4 connections inside the workplace for people to feel somehow that they feel that they belong.
Yeah.
But it takes up to 7 people that they know in the organization to really feel that connection. That, that connection in where you wake up in the morning because you're gonna be seeing some people that you can chat with and that you get along with and that you work well with other people. So with that research, if organizations don't pay attention like they were not paying attention before, when I used to say that I was a consultant in conflict management, they would look the other way because there's no conflict in my organization. Now we have to be more honest and say, yes, wherever there's 2 people, there's always room for conflict.
Yes.
And that conflict is normal, but when it gets to a point that gets to be toxic, that's when the problems arise, right?
Yeah.
When you teach people how to transform conflict into something more cognitive, something where they can create from, then it becomes a potent energy that can develop creativity, can bring different mentalities into creating something unique, instead of having just toxic people just not getting along well.
Yeah.
So yeah, organizations really need to change, right, and shift.
Definitely. I mean, and it's certainly to attract good talent nowadays. So that whole demographic is changing things. But like you say now as well, in the United States, you've got a whole different range of ages working together. And how do you get, the old grandpa, the grumpy old grandpa to work with, the younger person who wants to listen to their iPod and play music, and how do you make that work? And there's always, as you say, when you get 2 people together, there's always a risk of conflict. Now, writing the book, what was the inspiration to write the book? I mean, writing a book is not an easy task, and we were talking about this in the pre-show. It was a very difficult task to write the book, but you've put in a lot of effort into that, and you've taken some steps that I haven't seen before. And I've read a lot, and that's a space that I work in, is in conflict resolution as well. And you've taken some really amazing steps forward. Where did that come from, and why did you want to put it into a book?
Well, I wanted to put it into a book because right in 2014, I realized that when I was working with people, they would say, wow, whenever I work with you, you're like a mini master course. And then they would give me all these feedback that this is so potent. Like I never have grasped this information, or you're giving me something that is like a mini master course. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I start noticing the shift of people, and I start noticing that people feel more confident. The other thing that I noticed, that sometimes I would test them in emotional intelligence. And some of these people were in a high good level of emotional intelligence, but not necessarily feel comfortable with difficult conversations, high stake conversations. even performance evaluations that didn't go that well. And I noticed that there was a need, and that I had developed this methodology, that it was just not like the atypical training that you Google online, that they just give you a tip here, a tip there, a skill here, a skill there. But I had developed something more substantial. And because I'm also, I also understand the world of coaching as well. I always knew that this was a transformational process as well. That it had not necessarily to do just with a skill. Just like when I experienced my dad, right? That, he never went to school. He never went to any certification or anything like that. But he was a very spiritual man. And I decided, I said, you know what, I'm going to put this into a book. But not only, I was always in confusion, because it's like, I want the book to go to leaders or to people. And by the way, for me, leaders are everybody in organization. Because when you empower them, when you teach them these concepts, anybody in your organization can make a whole impact in organizations, right? So I want to put it clear in there. And when I was writing the book, it was me writing about perhaps for leaders or organizations. And I said, no, it has to be for both, because leaders have to be aware as to why is it that it's important to bring this to organizations, and leaders in organizations that read this with regards to organizations have to realize that they also have to invest in developing their leaders and developing them with things that will bring return of investments. A lot of organizations spend a lot of money taking people on a very nice trip to a beach, a restaurant, an event where they're going to go up the ropes and have fun for a whole day. And they pour their money into these team building things, and they don't work. They don't work because people put their best face just because they're going to be out of the office. Let's just, it's just going to be one day that I'm going to have to deal with these people. I'm just going to have fun with it. But the next day, people continue to be the same. Because there's no deeper transformation. Right? And people just, they just go to be back the same. There's no shifting in consciousness. There's no awareness building. There's no transformation. There's nothing in those trainings. And I would see that constantly they would prefer to do team buildings and pour out the money into that because it was fun, but then they don't realize that there's no return on investment on those. Then you have the other aspect in where companies will hire people to come and do trainings. But the trainings are not experiential, and this type of concept needs to be experiential in order for people to grasp this information. And I was in those team buildings organizations. Whenever I would go to a team building, I would do the same thing. When I would go to trainings, I would just use the file and just put it underneath my desk or my drawer, and I would never take it out. And that is not the point of this concept. You really need to I teach them very experiential. And I think that it is important, because then you can bring the return on investment information to the organization to see that in reality, I want to make an impact, and the work that I do creates an impact.
Definitely. That's what I love about your book is you start at chapter 1 with Einstein's quote, "No problem can be solved at the same level of consciousness that it's created." I'm just reading from your book here. And what I love, what you're talking about there is this transformational level of operating. And I really found it interesting because not many people talk this way, is that the focus within the book is it's not the problem isn't out there. The problem is in here, or from the organization. The problem is where the organization how it operates. Because from my experience, a similar sort of thing, you'll have organizations go get an external consultant in, usually some big accounting firm, and they'll give them a report, takes months to do, and they pay a lot of money, and as you say, it goes on a shelf somewhere and collects dust. And then they'll go on these retreats and things like that, and they'll have that one experience. Whereas other organizations that I've worked with, where we've implemented some systems where, as you say, people get together, 7 people. If I can do fingers, maths is probably not my strongest suit either, along with English. You mentioned about speaking Spanish. English, for me, I say English is my second language and I don't have a first one. So if I fluff it up, that's me. That's my unique character trait. But what I've noticed was those organizations that had this harmony, they didn't do these big, team building events and spend a lot of money on that. They actually did simple things where they got the people together and they connected. It was very simple processes. Sometimes it might have been a barbecue or things like that, but more so in the work environment. They got them together to have discussions and similar sort of things that. Sorry, I was going to do some product placement there, but I won't. This is your podcast. But what I noticed in your book is you come from this basis of it's within you first. If you make those subtle changes within your organization, all of a sudden you're going to transform. And I think you use that word a couple of times here, is you transform how you're operating. So it starts from within and then comes out. Does that, I mean, am I reading that correctly? Is that the part of the foundation of where you're operating from?
Yes, correct. That's why, it's a methodology of how to bring people from within to recognize there's certain things. And you mentioned at the beginning about women. I teach negotiation skill for women, right? And there's a lot of things that not only women, but people in general need to unlearn in order to be able to create awareness and be able to build from there. It is like if I take a computer and I clean the hardware, and then I start installing the new things. And when I do that, then people feel very empowered and are willing to transform. And therefore, all of a sudden, they realize that they can have difficult conversations and they're not going to shy away. They can, deal with situations that are difficult and be able to understand how to work within themselves in order to be able to go in and do what they need to do in order to fix things or to resolve things. So I think that is the basis of the book and what I'm talking about in this methodology that I developed. The same thing goes with organizations. The organizations they have a lot of great data and they don't even know what to use with that data, right?
Yes.
And there's a chapter in my book that I talk about how is it that you can use that data to help you transform the systematic things that you have in the organization that are perpetuating these problems. Unfortunately, some of these places are in HR. These perpetuate a process of just firing people. If the executive directors would put pen and calculate how much it costs to fire people, just because they don't know how to deal with the situation from the beginning, and it goes so bad that it becomes extremely toxic. Right? One of the things that I can tell you that it works because it works. I implemented a program, a conflict management program, a conflict management system inside an organization that it's a governmental organization. And if you know about government organization, you don't fire people. It's very difficult to fire people, right? There's a whole bunch of unions.
I deal with a lot of government organizations. Yes, that's so true.
Yeah, so you know that. So I went in and I worked with people that there has been people in there that for 5 to 10 years, they were not talking to each other. And I will work with them.
I've seen that.
And all of a sudden, they shift. They change. when they had 5 to 10 years not talking to the coworker, and they cannot move them around.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think so. It was in the midst where I was doing that type of work that maybe the second edition.
No, I was just referring to, in your book, you've got the chapter on awareness, and you say self-regulation and awareness, and this comes back to self as well. It's being aware of what's going on around you, and also how you're reacting to that. You talk a lot about that, and so it's something that I haven't seen much talked about there, but you really get into that detail, and I love that because it really works. Being aware of your reaction. I know from my perspective, a long time ago, I learned that most times when people making a jibe at you or something like that, it's to get a reaction, and if you want to be in control,
and you have to learn.
Go ahead.
You have to learn how to be neutral, how to control your consciousness, to be neutral, to be in a state of empowerment, and to be in a state where you're gonna see things from a different perspective, right? But I was gonna finish saying that doing that work in organizations, when I talked to HR and I said, this is what I do, it's like, no, Yvette, HR will probably not bring you in because it's very late by that time. And I said, if I was able to work with this governmental organization, with people that were not talking to each other for 10 years, and just they know that they couldn't go anywhere, and that they were going to continue working with the same person, and I was able to shift them, and they were able to keep a good relationship. What makes you think that I would not be able to do that? But guess what? It has been a pattern for years that the C-suite people think, oh, and the managers, supervisors, oh, HR is going to take care of it, but they're not skilled in mediation and conflict management. They're skilled in policy and procedures. So I'm going to do a policy. You just don't follow policy, and you're going to let go.
Yeah.
And how many times, and I have been in that situation, how many times have you let go the best employee just because nobody was advocating for them, nobody was helping them to work with the communication, and they were in a state of being that they were so, damaged already, and perhaps sick mentally, that they couldn't compose themselves in order to be able to maneuver the communication. And sometimes they ended up keeping the bullies. They ended up keeping the bad people in organizations. I went through it myself. I saw it. I went through the HR. I went to labor. I went and I was stunned seeing what they were doing. And it's like, why don't you guys bring a mediator? I just want to create a communication with this person so that we can respectfully work with each other. No. No, they were like, no, this is, and eventually, and they did what they did. They investigated, people still continued to be a part, and nothing got resolved. Until I decided, you know what, I need to leave. I cannot sustain coming every day to this workplace in where they didn't do anything to resolve the situation. They literally just, with their formal complaint process, they literally alienated the people and got us to a worse state. And where there's no space to communicate and work together because nobody did the middle work in order to make it happen.
And that costs a lot of money for organizations. It's one of those things that doesn't hit the balance sheet for the profit and loss. People actually don't see it. But we know that it does cost a lot of money. Employee turnover. Well, we know that employee turnover is expensive, but the cost of what that is. And you're right. Many times a good employee will get let go because the situation hasn't been addressed well, or there's a number of different factors that affect that. But that's becoming more and more costly, and that's where I think organizations and where your skills come in very handy to help organizations, because again, it was like you mentioned before the pandemic. The pandemic, a lot of people realized they can do things differently, so they didn't go back because they can do it differently. The workforce is not there anymore. It's not like when the baby boomers were working, that there's not as many workers there, and organizations need to find a better way. And you talk about that. I mean, one of the things I love, the level at the very beginning, you start with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then you go through to the unitive way, and you're talking about this collaboration. And it's not hard to make that collaboration happen. I mean, I think most things I teach, most things in life is easy. We just make it difficult because if you follow some key principles, and to be able to collaborate is not difficult. And you talk about, in your book about going through this transformation and the habits that are associated with that. How do people become aware of that they realize, okay, I'm not going to, we're not going to do this one retreat, we're going to climb some ropes and everything's going to be fine and dandy from that. But it actually takes, I mean, we know that it takes 21 to 28 times of repeating a behavior to change a habit. How do you instill that in an organization so that they actually start doing that and going, okay, the first few times we're going to do this, it's not going to have any results. We're probably, and I know from my experience when I've done it with organizations, I have the presence and to be able to just keep forcing through, and the change then happens. But for an organization that might look at it and go, well, we tried this once and it didn't work. How do you convince them or show them that it takes more than just one go or even 5 goes? It takes a little bit more than that to get the results.
Well, I've seen it, for example, in mediation. Sometimes people have had a habitual process of how to deal with conflict because they don't have any other way of seeing conflict to be resolved. And when I have done mediations and I experience people and they have a strong aha moment because they have never seen, even in their dreams, never seen that there could be a different way to be able to deal with certain people, right? I'm not saying that, obviously, the work of Bill Eddy about high conflict people. We have a lot of people that are not even diagnosed with psychological issues that work in the workplace. But, we're talking about people that are not to that extreme, but that they never had experienced a way of communicating and hearing each other, for example. And when they get to experience that through a third person that comes in, helps them to be able to do that, they realize that their position was so strong that they were not allowing other perspectives to be brought into their light, into their vision. So I've seen it firsthand that it is true that we say a behavior, but when you generate an impact on people at that level, it would be an experience that they will always remember.
Yeah. I think,
right?
I mean, and this is why I really love your book. And because of, I mean, and with all respect to Bill Eddy, the focus appears to be on high conflict people. They talk about, how to deal with high conflict people. What I love about your book is you bring it back and go, well, actually, what am I contributing to that? And I look at that from my own perspective. When I look back at my history, I mean, there was a lot of times where I was involved in conflict, and I think I was quite fortunate because my mum always said when I was younger, it takes 2 to tango. And then when I'm looking back at that, I was a high conflict person, technically. And when I changed, and that's why I mentioned about my resolution was to listen more. I've been a good listener for a long time. And I was reading about the World Championship Toastmaster who won the championships, and a friend was going home with him. And as they were at the airport, he just won the World Championship in Toastmasters, walked into a bookshop and bought a book on public speaking. And they asked him why, and he goes, well, you can always be better. And that's what I really love about the approach you have, because I look at the situations now where the people that I'm dealing with, if I behaved the way I had behaved in the past, those people would be high conflict people. but because I'm dealing with things differently. They're
Mhm.
not high conflict people. And that's what I love about your book, that you really get into this. How are you approaching the situation? And that makes, do you think that's really important from that? I mean, that's probably a rhetorical question because the book is a lot about that. But do you
Yeah.
want to expand on that a little bit? Because I really think that that makes the difference. A lot of people we look to as high conflict people, we're not really paying attention that we might be actually stoking that fire a little bit.
Well, yeah, because people have egos, right?
Mm,
People, have egos, and
mm,
if egos get stuck in positions,
mm,
and if you're in a situation of conflict and you're stuck in your position,
yeah.
and then the other person gets stuck in their position,
Mm,
and you said something very interesting that your mom taught you. It takes two to tango. Well, it
okay.
also takes a tango dance in order
Mm,
to help people to see
yeah.
perspectives from a different lens.
Yeah.
It is like when you're dancing tango, right? You
Mm,
put somebody into a position, right?
yeah.
And then, if that person doesn't perceive you as a threat,
Mm,
right? And you communicate in a way that you're not
exactly.
threatening to the other person, then you're going to be able to move them to the other side, and they're going to be able to be open to see your
Mm,
perspective, right?
yeah.
So it takes two to tango, and it also takes the dance in order to make sure that you invite the other person to see your perspective. When
Mm,
you block people and you don't want people, to see their perspective, but only yours, the
yeah.
other person is just naturally going to say no.
Mm,
I block to see your perspective. But
yeah.
when you say, you know what, I understand where you're coming from, and I can see where you're coming from, and would you be open to see my perspective, because I think that I'm learning from you. Would you be open? And then the other person
Mm,
will say, yeah, I'll be open. And that's when you tango, right? That's when you
yeah.
dance with the other person. Now, when it comes to bullying, a lot of people would say, well, the perpetrator, the person that is the bully, it's in full, complete responsibility. Guess what? I realized in myself that because I have severe high levels of empathy and I didn't know how to put boundaries, I
Mm,
was putting myself as a doormat.
yeah.
So I took my own level of responsibility and said, you know what? If I continue moving from one job to another, most likely than not, I'm going to manifest the same person. So
Mm,
what is it that I can do in order to work on my persona so that I don't communicate and attract these type of situations,
yeah.
and be able to learn from what I'm dealing with, so that I know how to ask the right questions for the next job, so that
Mm,
I don't end up with a person like this.
yeah. That's powerful. I love that.
Mhm.
And from that perspective as well, the perception and your identity that you associate with yourself, um, how does that connect? And the example I'll use, and it's a prevalent example for today, what's happening at the moment. Take
Mhm.
Putin, for example. He's defending Russia. He sees himself as a Russian. Um,
Mhm.
if he saw himself as a human being, would he do that? If you're looking, going, okay, let's
Yeah.
expand how we see ourselves. So if you see
Mhm.
yourself as, if you chunk up and see, so okay, let's take it to a higher level. If you looked at that and go, well, okay, as a Russian, I'm defending Russia, so it's okay to kill other people that aren't Russians, or even my own people that
Mhm.
are Russians, to defend that for the other Russians. But then
Mhm.
if we look at it and go, well, if Putin went from and said, hey, I'm a human being, am I am I really looking after all human beings here? Might he react differently? I don't know the answer to that. I know from
Yeah,
my
and then
perspective.
yeah, and
Okay.
unfortunately, we have a whole bunch of programming with people that act that way, right?
Mm,
There's a programming that takes place that creates a disassociation from who you are with other people.
mm,
And when you're coming from that standpoint, you're always going to look for violence and negative ways of how to resolve conflict, right?
yeah.
But if you see yourself like, I'm a human being, let me figure it out. What are if you put yourself in a space of, this is my position,
Mm,
this is my way of thinking, and you fight from that position, But if you decide to open up and say, you know what, I'm a human being just like anybody else. You know, I know that I'm a leader in this place, but let me see what is of interest that we can negotiate. But it has to take the two people to downsize their ego and create a good psychological space in order for the other person to open up. But unfortunately, we live in a world where resources are seen scarce. And whenever you see resources as being scarce, then people go into position base and they fight for things. And that is very tough. That's why, you know, the mini version of a whole world is in an organization, right? And I experienced that, and I said, well, this is the area where I can come and make a difference. You know, I didn't choose to do divorce mediation because I felt that I couldn't do much there, right? But then I said, in organizations I'm familiar with it, maybe perhaps like here I can make a difference. We have other conflict resolution experts that go and do, you know, worldwide. You know, I have William Ury. He's also a well-known conflict resolution person that he has negotiated in between countries, and he has done a tremendous job on doing that. So so we need more people like me, and that's why I'm also very happy to be teaching at universities, because I want to make sure that I teach what I have, and I can empower people that this is a field of work that it's very rewarding in one way or another. But we need to also educate people that this field of work does exist. Right, because we become overshadowed by the legal and the attorneys, right? By legal counsel, because you know, people associate conflict resolution. It's an attorney. Now attorneys are going into mediation, and unfortunately they're not very well trained, because they just go and get a 40-hour training and they think that with that
experience.
Well, you know, if I were to have $1 with everybody that would tell me that I had a very bad mediation, I would probably have a good amount of money, because they have encountered attorneys, because people go to attorneys to try to resolve conflict, and then these attorneys bring their buddies that are mediators that are also attorneys, but they're not very well trained. You know, it takes a lot of years to train somebody to be a neutral. They have been trained.
I probably have a little bit of a bias in that area as well, but I think there's a little bit of a, you know, when you incentivize someone that they get paid more the longer it goes, it becomes there's not really that there. What I wanted to touch on was this. You mentioned, and I love that you brought this up, was this scarcity, because and scarcity is a source of conflict. And I love that, because I think the world has moved. I think the world has moved beyond a zero-sum game. In you know, back in history, to have more, for you to have more, someone had to have less. that's why there was so many wars and invasions, just for the resources, essentially. But since the Industrial Revolution, one of the biggest sources of resourcing has been innovation. Because through innovation, we're creating a bigger pie. So we become less. So what we can do now, we can do so much more with so less. And I love that you brought up that scarcity is an element of conflict, because part of that, and where that links to your start of the book, where you have the quote from Einstein, when you move to that higher level of thinking, all of a sudden you can innovate, and you can actually find a way where people can all relate together. How do you see that?
You know, definitely, you know, creativity to this hour of the day has been researched, right? And if people are in a state of conflict, or in a state where they don't see different perspectives, they have a very closed mentality. When you start opening up your mentality and you start going into different levels of consciousness, it is within that you're going to find newer ways of doing things, innovative ways of doing things. And that is what companies should be fostering more and more inside the organization.
Yeah. I love that.
You know, and it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen as much, right? But for example, Google I could say that, for example, Google, the way that they developed the Gmail, it was because they gave a certain amount of hours to their employees. I don't know now, but certain amount of hours to their employees to go out and just do something that they wish to do, volunteer in an organization or create something without the pressure of a boss or that you have to perform. Just do it. All of a sudden they created Gmail, which became a very, very unique product that everybody uses. And then now they also sell it for organizations, and even universities use the Gmails, right? The Gmail, we use Gmail in some almost the 3 universities that I'm at. We use Gmail. We use that system. So obviously the paid version, but it came from a group of employees that were given that space, and then just go and just be creative and see what you can create with no pressure, right? When you have people under pressure, when you have people in scarcity, in fear, not only it would manifest out here, but it manifested inside. Because it also affects people inside. When you're in a fleet and flight or fight, your body starts shutting down, because the only thing that it can think of is, how am I going to protect myself for something that shows to be dangerous? So your organs start shutting down, your breathing patterns start shutting down, all of that is shutting down. And I know this because I deal with anxiety all the time, right? So, when you go into that panic attack, it is because, somehow the body is thinking that it's under threat, right?
Exactly.
And that is what we're doing to people, and people are getting sick. I got to a point at one level when I was dealing with these type of toxic environments in the workplace, that it came to a point after so many years trying to put it in a different perspective that I just couldn't get out of bed one of these days.
Yeah, and that's what you certainly don't want that from a personal perspective, and certainly from an employee perspective. I know we probably talked a little bit longer than
yes,
I know you've got a busy day, so I don't want to hold you up too much longer, but it's been lovely talking. Before we go, we'll put all the details in the show notes, but do you want to just share how people can best reach you and contact you? Do you want to share that here in the podcast? We will put it in the show notes, but do you want to just let people know?
Well, my name is right there on the sign here on Zoom, Yvette Durazo, and my consulting company is Unitive Consulting. My book is in Amazon. You can find it on Amazon, and then it's going to eventually be distributed in other bookstores as well. I, also have a chapter for free that people can download. If they go into my website, they can download chapter 3, which is about people skills. And you guys can start at least experiencing, and learning about how is it that I write about conflict resolution, and experiencing a little bit of conflict intelligence and what is it about the book. In the mean process, I also have, a group coaching in where I little by little I expose people to my teachings, as well as the ability to come in and experience a little bit of coaching, in the group, so that they can experience what it is, because this is very experiential. And if they don't know how it feels or how this works, people are not going to be aware of how is it that this can be a transformative process, right? So I'm doing all of that so that people can, join me in, I call it the ambassador, group, because these people are going to be the ones that are the ambassadors that going into their companies and saying, you know what, this really works. Let's bring this in order to create more peace in our organization.
I love that. And before we go, can you leave the audience with your key wisdom or wisdoms, something they can take away and use, or so what would be the key thing that you'd like them to take away from listening to this podcast?
Well, throughout my book, there's a lot of quotes that I really love. I really love a lot of quotes, but I think that one of the things that I can share with you is that, I used to be also, when I was younger, because of the fact that I was born in a very in a very big family structure. I used to fight things. And it took me years, it took me when I was a little bit, probably around like 12 years, that I realized that, I had to change my perspective. And then all of a sudden what would start happening is that my own sibling will come to me to help them resolve conflict with the other ones somehow. So be able to be open, foster a growth mindset. That's going to help you to become more flexible in your way of thinking. And I also talk about growth mindset in the book.
I love that. I really love that foundation that you bring to the world, in the sense of look within first, which isn't a new concept, but I love how you've added that to conflict resolution, and it's fantastic and a really new perspective. So I'd really encourage the listeners to get out there and get hold of this book, because it's fabulous. It's really good. Yvette, it has been so wonderful having you in the show. I know there's a lot more I'd like to talk about. Hopefully we can get you back for a part 2 and discuss things further, but thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your audience to listen to me. Thank you.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.